The wind in the Texas Panhandle did not just blow. It scoured. It was a living thing, a relentless, invisible hand that stripped the paint from the siding and the moisture from a woman's skin. It was late autumn in the year 1880, and the Red River Valley was the color of dried tobacco and old bone. Violet Hale sat at the heavy oak desk in the corner of the ranch house parlor. The ledger open before her, her fingers, stained faintly with black ink near the cuticles and dusted with white flour on the knuckles, traced the columns of figures. She was 25 years old, though the sun and the wind had already begun to etch the very first fine lines of caution around her eyes. She was not a Hale by blood, and in this house, blood was the only currency that held its value. "You are using too much lamp oil. Violet," a voice said from the doorway. Violet did not jump. She had learned 3 years ago that showing fear to Regina Hale was like showing a limping leg to a wolf. She merely finished writing the entry 12 sacks of feed, $4.50, and capped the inkwell before turning. Regina Hale, the matriarch of the Hale Ranch, stood leaning on her cane. She was a small woman, shrunk by age, but her eyes were hard, black beads that missed nothing. "The sun has not yet set. Mother Hale," Violet said, her voice steady. "But the dust storm outside has made the room dark. I cannot balance the books in the shadows. Back in my day, we worked by the light of the hearth," Regina snapped. Moving into the room, she ran a finger over the mantelpiece, checking for dust. "But you town girls have delicate eyes." Violet closed the ledger. It was the same old song. She was the town girl, the outsider, the mistake her husband Luke had made. It did not matter that Violet could stitch a wound on a gelding better than the ranch hands, or that she was the one who kept the creditors at bay with her careful accounting. To Regina, and to Luke's older brother Gideon, she was simply the woman who was taking up space. "Is Luke back from the North Ridge?" Violet asked, changing the subject. "He is with Gideon," Regina said, a hint of smugness in her tone. "They are discussing real business, men's business, not this scribbling." Violet looked down at her left hand. The gold wedding band was simple, a thin circle that felt heavy on her finger today. It was the only thing that gave her the right to sit in this chair. Sometimes, when the wind howled particularly loud, she wondered if she was standing on solid ground or if she was merely a guest who had overstayed her welcome. She stood up, smoothing the front of her calico dress. "I will go check the stew. The boys will be hungry." "See that you do," Regina said. "And do not put so much pepper in it this time. We are not Mexicans." Violet walked to the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under her boots. The house smelled of stale smoke and old secrets. On the kitchen table, sitting alone on the scarred wood, was a heavy iron object. It was a railroad spike. It was brand new, not rusted like the scrap metal in the barn. It was cold, dark steel, heavy enough to crush a man's hand. Luke had brought it home 2 days ago, placing it there with a strange, feverish light in his eyes. The future. "Violet," he had said. "This is the future. They are coming right through the valley, and they need our water." She touched the cold metal. It felt like a threat. The railroad was eating the valleys to the east, swallowing small ranches and spitting out coal smoke. Luke saw money. He saw a way to save the ranch from its slow decline. But Violet saw the way the town was splitting apart. There were those who believed the train brought civilization, and those who knew it brought only fences and taxes. She busied herself with the biscuits, kneading the dough with a rhythm that matched her anxious heart. The next morning, the wind had died down enough for a trip into town. Violet hitched the mare to the buckboard herself. It was a 10-mile ride to the settlement, a collection of weather-beaten false front buildings that clung to the dusty earth as if afraid of being blown into Oklahoma. The town felt different lately. There were strangers on the boardwalks, men in suits that cost more than a year's worth of cattle, and men with eyes that shifted too quickly. Violet tied her horse in front of the mercantile. She needed salt, coffee, and a liniment for a horse with a sore fetlock. As she stepped up onto the wooden sidewalk, she nearly collided with Dr. May Callahan. "Easy there, Violet," the older woman said, her voice rough and warm, like worn leather. Dr. Callahan was one of the few people in town who looked Violet in the eye. She wore men's trousers and a long duster coat, and she smoked thin cigars when she thought no one was looking. "Good morning, Doctor," Violet said. "Is the ague still going around?" "It is fading," Dr. Callahan said, tipping her wide-brimmed hat back. "But there is a worse sickness coming. Greed. I just patched up a surveyor who got a bottle broken over his head at the saloon. Folks are edgy." "Luke signed the preliminary agreement," Violet said quietly. The doctor sighed, looking down the street. "I heard. Be careful, girl. That water right makes the Hale land worth a fortune. And where there is a fortune, there are vultures." Violet nodded, a knot tightening in her stomach. She turned to enter the store, but a commotion down the street caught her attention. A silence swept over the main street, starting from the livery stable and rolling toward them like a wave. The loud voices of the cattle drovers died down. The piano in the saloon stopped mid-note. A lone rider was coming down the center of the street. He rode a paint horse, a sturdy animal with intelligent eyes and feathers braided into its mane. The rider sat easy in the saddle, moving with the animal rather than sitting upon it. He wore buckskins that were stained with the dust of 1,000 miles, and a Winchester rifle rested in the scabbard by his knee. "Who is that?" Violet whispered. "That," Dr. Callahan said, her voice low, "is Caleb Ward." Violet had heard the name. Everyone had. He was a breed apart, quite literally, half white, half Comanche. He existed in the dangerous seam between two warring worlds. They said he was a scout for the army, a tracker for the marshals, and a guardian for the wagon trains that dared to cross the disputed territories. They said he guarded half the frontier because he knew every rock and ravine from the Rio Grande to the Canadian River. He was terrifying. He was not handsome in the way Luke was handsome. Luke had a boyish charm, a soft smile. Caleb Ward looked like he had been carved out of granite and left out in the rain. His hair was black and long, tied back with a leather thong. His face was sharp angles and deep shadows. He pulled his horse up in front of the sheriff's office. He did not dismount immediately. He sat there, his dark eyes scanning the street. He looked at the men on the porch, the horses at the rail, the rooftops. Finally, his gaze landed on Violet. For a second, the world stopped. His eyes were not cruel, but they were intensely remote. It was like looking into a deep well. He saw her, really saw her in her faded blue dress and her worn boots. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply acknowledged her existence and then looked away. Violet felt a flush rise up her neck. It was not attraction, she told herself. It was fear. He was a dangerous man. "Why is he here?" Violet asked. "Delivering news. Likely," the doctor said. "Or hunting someone. Caleb Ward does not come into town for sugar and lace. He goes where the trouble is." Caleb dismounted in one fluid motion. He walked with a silence that was unnerving for a man of his size. As he passed a group of railroad workers, they stepped back, giving him a wide berth. He was a reminder of the wildness they were trying to pave over. "Come on," Dr. Callahan said, touching Violet's arm. "Let us get your supplies. It is best not to stare at a wolf, even a tame one." "Is he tame?" Violet asked. The doctor laughed, a dry, barking sound. "Honey, there is nothing tame about that man. He just chooses not to bite today." The ride back to the ranch was long and quiet. Violet could not shake the image of the scout's eyes. They were so different from the eyes she saw at the dinner table. That evening, the tension in the Hale house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Gideon Hale, Luke's older brother, was pacing the floor. Gideon was a large man, running to fat, with a red face and a temper that flared like a match. "They are offering 10 cents on the dollar for the grazing rights if we do not sign the water deal too." Gideon shouted, "It is robbery." Luke sat at the table, his head in his hands. He looked tired. "It is the standard rate, Gideon, but the water access point, that is where the money is. Silas Tarrant promised me." "Silas Tarrant is a snake," Gideon spat. "And you are a fool for trusting him without a lawyer." "I read the contract," Violet said from the doorway. She held a tray of cornbread. The clauses are clear, Gideon, but the penalty for withdrawal is steep. If we sign, we are bound. Gideon spun on her. Who asked you go back to your pots, woman? This is Hale land. It concerns Hales. Violet is my wife, Luke said, though his voice lacked thunder. She has a head for figures. Gideon, better than yours. Regina spoke up from her rocking chair by the fire. Figures do not hold a rifle. Luke, your father held this land with lead, not ink. If you sell the water to the railroad, we will have strangers crawling all over our pastures, building fences, scaring the stock. We are broke. Mama, Luke slammed his hand on the table. The railroad spike jumped. Look at the books. We cannot survive another winter like the last one. We need the cash infusion. He picked up the spike and held it up. This is civilization coming to our door. We can ride it, or we can get run over by it. Violet set the cornbread down. She looked at her husband. He was trying so hard to be the man of the house, to step out of Gideon's shadow and Regina's grip. She loved him for that effort, even if she feared his judgment. Luke, she said softly, just make sure the deed stays in your name. Specifically, not the family trust. Gideon's eyes narrowed. What are you whispering to him, trying to cut us out? I am trying to protect him, Violet said, standing her ground. And myself. You have no rights here. Gideon sneered. If Luke dies tomorrow, you are nothing. You understand that nothing. That is enough, Luke said, standing up. Violet is right. I am going to meet Tarrant tomorrow at the creek boundary. I will finalize the survey lines. And then we will be rich. We will all be rich. He looked at Violet, his eyes pleading for her support. She forced a smile, but inside, she felt cold. Gideon's words hung in the air like smoke. If Luke dies tomorrow. Later that night, the wind died completely. Violet lay in bed next to Luke. He was already asleep, his breathing heavy and rhythmic. She stared up at the wooden ceiling beams. The silence outside was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when the prairie holds its breath. Usually, there was a coyote howling, or the rustle of dry cottonwood leaves, or the creak of the windmill. Tonight, there was nothing. The sky outside the window was a vast, crushing blackness, the stars looking like cold, distant eyes. Violet turned on her side and looked at the silhouette of her husband. He was a good man, but he was weak. He wanted to be a savior, but he was swimming with sharks. She thought of the scout, Caleb Ward, the way he sat on his horse alert, balanced, ready for violence, but not seeking it. He looked like a man who owned himself. Violet touched the ring on her finger. She did not own herself. She belonged to Luke, and by extension, she was a possession of the Hale Ranch. She got up quietly and walked to the window. The moonlight turned the yard into a landscape of silver and shadow. On the desk in the parlor, the railroad spike sat, a piece of iron that promised connection to the world. But here, in the dark, it looked like a nail for a coffin. I need to leave, she whispered to the glass. It was a thought she had suppressed for months. But where would she go? She had no family left. Her dowry was gone, absorbed into the ranch's debts. She went back to bed, but sleep did not come. She lay there, listening to the silence. It was too quiet. The cattle were not lowing. The dogs were not barking. It felt as if the entire world was waiting for something to break. The next morning, the sky was a bruised purple color at dawn. Luke dressed early. He put on his best coat and polished his boots. I will be back by noon, he told Violet. He kissed her on the forehead. His lips felt cool. Make something good for supper. A roast, maybe. We will celebrate. Be careful, Luke, she said. She adjusted his collar. Take a gun. He laughed. I am meeting a railroad agent. Violet, not a band of outlaws. Silas Tarrant is a businessman. Take it anyway, she insisted. He sighed and strapped his holster on, though she noticed he did not check the load. Happy? Safe, she corrected. She watched him ride out. He looked small against the vastness of the plains. He was riding toward the creek, the place where the water ran deep and the grass was greenest, the place the railroad wanted most. Violet turned back to the house. Regina was already in the kitchen, banging pots. "He is a fool," Regina muttered as Violet entered. "Selling our water. He is saving your roof," Violet replied, her patience thin this morning. "He is selling his birthright for paper money," Regina said. She looked at Violet with a gaze that was pure venom. "And you pushed him to it, you with your city hunger for fancy things." Violet did not argue. There was no point. She went to the parlor and sat at the desk. She opened the Bible where Luke kept his important papers. She needed to check the survey map again. As she flipped through the heavy pages, a folded piece of paper fell out. It was not the map. It was a letter, written in Luke's handwriting, but the ink was fresh. "To my wife, Violet," it began. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She read the first few lines. "If you are reading this, then things have gone wrong. I have realized that Gideon and Mother do not have our best interests at heart. I have hidden the true copy of the will and the new deed." Violet stopped reading. Her hands were trembling. Luke knew. He had seen the way Gideon looked at him, the way Regina whispered. He wasn't as blind as she thought. She heard a sound outside. It was not the slow clip-clop of a returning horse. It was the frantic, thundering gallop of a rider in a panic. Violet shoved the letter back into the Bible and ran to the porch. A ranch hand, a young boy named Tommy Pike, was galloping toward the house. His horse was foaming at the mouth. Tommy's face was white as a sheet. "Mrs. Hail, Mrs. Hail!" he screamed, his voice cracking. Regina came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Gideon appeared from the barn, a pitchfork in his hand. Tommy pulled the horse up so hard it slid in the dust. He tumbled off, scrambling toward them. "What is it, boy?" Gideon roared. "Speak!" "It's Luke," Tommy gasped, tears streaming down his dust-caked face. "It's Mr. Luke." Violet felt the world tilt on its axis. The blood drained from her head. She gripped the porch railing, the rough wood digging into her palms. "Where is he?" Violet asked, her voice sounding like it came from miles away. "Down by the creek," Tommy sobbed. "His horse. It must have spooked. He is in the water. Ma'am, his neck." The boy didn't finish. "He didn't have to." Violet looked at Gideon. For a split second, before he composed his face into a mask of shock, she saw something in his eyes. It was not grief. It was relief. The silence of the night before made sense now. The sky had been holding its breath for this. The wind picked up suddenly, slamming the screen door against the frame with a sound like a gunshot. The first gust of a new storm hit Violet in the face, carrying the scent of rain and ruin. Luke was dead. The barrier between Violet and the wolves was gone. She looked at the horizon, where the dark clouds were gathering, swirling like bruises in the sky. Somewhere out there, perhaps miles away, Caleb Ward was riding the line, watching the storm roll in. But here, on the porch of the Hale Ranch, Violet was entirely alone. She stood straight, despite the trembling in her knees. She would not let them see her fall. Not yet, but as she looked at Regina, she saw the old woman's eyes shift from Tommy to her. The look was cold, calculating, and absolutely merciless. The morning had not even begun, and the war had already started. The earth over Luke Hale's grave was still raw, a wound in the dry Texas soil that refused to close. They had buried him quickly, with a haste that bordered on indecent. The service had been short, the preacher mumbling words about God's will while the wind whipped the hem of Violet's black dress against her legs. She stood apart from the others, a solitary figure against the gray horizon. There were no tears left in her, only a hollow ache that felt as vast and empty as the prairie itself. Violet returned to the ranch house, the silence of the ride matched only by the heavy dread settling in her stomach. She walked into the parlor, intending to retrieve the family Bible where she had hidden Luke's letter, but she stopped dead in the doorway. The room had been ransacked. Books were pulled from the shelves, lying open like dead birds on the floor. The drawers of the heavy oak desk were overturned. Papers were scattered everywhere, invoices, receipts, cattle tallies. Standing in the center of the chaos were Gideon and Regina Hale. Regina turned, her face a mask of cold fury. She held the family Bible in her hands. She shook it upside down. Nothing fell out. "Where is it?" Regina demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Violet felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty house. She had moved the letter the moment she heard the news of Luke's death, sewing it into the lining of her petticoat. It was the only instinct that had made sense in the blur of grief. "Where is what? Mother Hale?" Violet asked, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Do not play the innocent with me, girl," Gideon growled. He stepped over a pile of ledgers, his bulk filling the room. "The deed, the original land grant, and whatever papers Luke was foolish enough to sign regarding the water rights." "I do not have them," Violet said. "Luke handled the business." "Liar!" Regina slammed the Bible onto the table. "You and your town ways, you bewitched him. You twisted his mind against his own blood. We know you have been stealing from the accounts. We know you planned to run off with the money once the railroad paid out." Violet stared at them, stunned by the sheer velocity of their malice. "That is insane. I loved him." "You loved the land," Gideon spat. "But the land belongs to Hales, and you are just a squatter." "I am his widow," Violet said, lifting her chin. "And by law, half of this ranch is mine." Gideon laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Law out here. The law is what we say it is. And we say you are a thief." He advanced on her, and for the first time, Violet felt a genuine fear for her physical safety. She stepped back, bumping into the doorframe. "Get out of my sight," Regina hissed. "Go to your room. If I see you before morning, I will have the dogs on you." Violet fled. She did not go to her room to weep. She went to her room to think. They were desperate. They had not found what they were looking for, which meant the letter in her petticoat was more dangerous than she had realized. Later that afternoon, the need to escape the suffocating air of the house drove her to the stables. She told herself she was checking on her mare. But in truth, she needed to be anywhere Gideon was not. The stables were dim and smelled of hay and manure. Violet moved quietly, soothing the horses as she passed. She reached her mare's stall and leaned her forehead against the animal's warm neck. Voices drifted from the tack room at the far end of the barn. Violet froze. She recognized the heavy, slurred tone of Gideon. The other voice was smoother, cultured, but with an underlying edge of steel. It was Silas Tarrant, the railroad agent. She should have left. Instead, she crept closer, hiding behind a stack of grain sacks. "She is becoming a problem," Gideon, Tarrant was saying. "The auction is in 7 days. I cannot have a grieving widow waving a contesting claim around. My superiors in Chicago want clear title. No complications." "There will be no complications," Gideon assured him. "We turned the house upside down. She has nothing." "She has presence," Tarrant countered. "Sympathy. If she speaks to the judge, she could delay the proceedings for months. We do not have months. The track layers are 20 miles east and moving fast." There was a rustling sound, like stiff paper being exchanged. Then came a smell that made Violet's stomach turn the sharp, chemical scent of coal oil and the metallic tang of fresh ink. It was the smell of the railroad. $5,000, Tarrant said. "An advance. Consider it a fee for cleaning up the property." "She will be gone tonight," Gideon said, his voice thick with greed. "I will make sure of it." "Do not hurt her, Gideon," Tarrant said, though his tone suggested he did not actually care. "Accidents raise questions. Just make her disappear, taint her name, make her a pariah. If she runs, she looks guilty. If she stays, she is a thief." Violet backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. They were not just stealing the ranch. They were erasing her. She managed to slip out of the stable unseen, but as she crossed the yard toward the house, a buggy pulled up. It was Sheriff Rusk. The sheriff was a man who wore his badge like a shield against morality. He tipped his hat to Violet, but his eyes were hard. "Mrs. Hale," Rusk said. He did not dismount. "I have some papers for you." He handed her a folded document. Violet took it, her fingers numb. "What is this?" "A summons," Rusk said. "There have been allegations of embezzlement, serious charges, and given the suspicious nature of your husband's accident, the county prosecutor is opening an investigation." "Suspicious," Violet whispered. "You think I killed him?" "I think a young woman with no money suddenly standing to inherit a prime water source has motive." Rusk said, "I am not arresting you yet, ma'am, but you are to remain on the property until I come for you tomorrow morning to transport you to the county jail for questioning. It is for your own safety, of course." He smiled, a thin stretching of lips that did not reach his eyes. "Do not try to leave town. Violet, the boys are watching the roads." He wheeled his buggy around and left. Violet stood in the yard, the paper crushing in her hand. It was a trap. If she stayed, she went to jail, likely to die of fever or hang for a crime she did not commit. If she ran, she proved their lies true, but looking at the darkening sky, she knew she had no choice. Staying meant death. She went inside to pack. She had barely thrown 2 dresses into a carpet bag when the door to her bedroom burst open. It was not morning. It was barely supper time. But Regina and Gideon were done waiting. "Get out," Gideon said. He did not shout. The quiet menace was far worse. "The sheriff said I was to stay," Violet said, backing toward the window. "The sheriff works for the highest bidder," Regina said. She grabbed Violet's arm, her fingers digging in like talons. "And we are paying him to look the other way while we throw the trash out." They dragged her. It was not a dignified exit. Gideon grabbed her carpet bag and hurled it down the stairs. Regina shoved Violet after it. "You take nothing that belongs to the Hales." Regina screamed. "No jewelry, no silver." She ripped the small locket from Violet's neck, the one Luke had given her on their first anniversary. The chain snapped, stinging Violet's skin. They pushed her out onto the front porch. The wind had picked up significantly since the funeral. It was howling now, a low moan that vibrated through the floorboards. The temperature was dropping fast. "You are no longer a Hale," Regina shouted over the wind. "If you set foot on this land again, I will shoot you myself." The heavy front door slammed shut. The sound echoed like the closing of a tomb. Then came the sound of the bolt sliding home. Violet stood on the porch, shivering. She wore only her black dress and a thin shawl. Her coat was inside. Her money, save for a few coins in her pocket, was inside. She walked down the steps, her legs feeling like lead. She picked up her carpet bag. It was light, too light. She moved toward the barn, hoping to at least take her mare, but the barn doors were padlocked. Gideon had been thorough. "Mrs. Violet," the whisper came from the shadows of the smokehouse. Violet jumped, clutching her bag to her chest. Donna Rosa, the old housekeeper who had been with the ranch since before the Hales arrived, stepped out. She was wrapped in a heavy wool poncho. Her face was lined with sorrow. "Donna Rosa," Violet breathed. "They will fire you if they see you." "They are busy counting their blood money," the old woman said. She pressed a small burlap sack into Violet's hands. "Take this. It is not much. Some dried beef, biscuits, and a flask of water, and $20 in silver." "I cannot take your money," Violet protested. "Take it," Donna Rosa commanded. "You will need it to buy silence." She pulled a scrap of paper from her sleeve. "Listen to me closely, child. Do not take the road to town. Rusk has men at the bridge. And do not go south. The railroad crews are there." "Where can I go?" Violet asked. "The whole world is closed to me." "Go west," Donna Rosa said. "Toward the Caprock. There is a trail through the Slot Canyon. It is dangerous, but the sheriff's men will not ride there at night." "The canyon?" Violet looked at the paper. It was a crude map, drawn in charcoal. "That is Comanche territory, or close to it." "Better the Comanche than the Hales," Donna Rosa said. "Go! The storm is coming. A blue norther. It will cover your tracks, but it will kill you if you do not find shelter." Violet hugged the old woman. A brief, fierce embrace. "Thank you." "Run," Donna Rosa whispered. "And do not look back." Violet ran. She did not have a horse. She had to steal one. She found an old gelding in the mesmerizing pen. A horse too old for cattle work, but sturdy enough. She used a length of rope for a halter, not daring to break the lock on the tack room for a saddle. She scrambled onto the horse's bare back, her skirts bunching around her legs. She rode out into the gathering dark, steering the horse away from the main gate and cutting through the wire fence where the staples were loose. The wind hit her with the force of a physical blow. It was carrying dust now, grit that scoured her face and stung her eyes. The temperature was plummeting. Within the hour, the sweat on the horse's neck was freezing into rime. Violet followed Donna Rosa's map by the light of a small lantern she had snatched from the mesmerizing pen fence. Shielding the flame with her body, the land rose, becoming rocky and treacherous. The smooth prairie gave way to jagged breaks and ravines. The storm intensified. It was no longer just wind. Snow began to mix with the dust hard, stinging pellets of ice that bit into her skin. The world dissolved into a swirling gray void. Up and down lost their meaning. The old gelding was struggling. He stumbled once, twice. Violet clung to his mane, her fingers stiff with cold. She could feel the animal's panic rising. He shied at the shadows of twisting mesquite bushes, dancing sideways on the slick rocks. "Steady," she whispered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the word. "Steady, boy!" A sudden gust, stronger than the rest, roared down the canyon walls. It tore the shawl from her shoulders and extinguished the lantern in a single breath. Darkness, absolute and terrifying, swallowed them. The horse reared, terrified by the sudden blackness and the screaming wind. Violet lost her grip. She slid from the slick back of the animal, flailing for a hold that wasn't there. She hit the ground hard, rolling. The earth disappeared beneath her. She was falling. It wasn't a long fall, perhaps 15 feet, but she struck the side of the ravine, her shoulder slamming against a protruding rock with a sickening crunch. She tumbled to the bottom, landing in a drift of snow and dead leaves. Pain exploded in her left shoulder, white-hot and blinding. It stole the breath from her lungs. She lay there, gasping, staring up at the swirling gray chaos above. She tried to move, but her body refused to obey. The cold was already seeping into her bones, a numbness that started in her toes and fingers and crept inward. Above her, she heard the frantic hoofbeats of the gelding fading away into the storm. She was alone. She had no coat, no fire, no horse. Her shoulder felt broken. So this is it, she thought, a strange calm settling over her. This is how it ends. Not fighting for my home, but freezing in a ditch like a discarded dog. Gideon had won. Silas Tarrant had won. They would tell the town she ran away with the money and died of her own stupidity. Luke's memory would be tarnished, and she would just be a cautionary tale. I am going to die, she thought, and I am going to die looking guilty. She closed her eyes. The wind sounded like 1,000 voices screaming her name. The cold was no longer painful. It was becoming almost warm, a seductive sleepiness that pulled at her consciousness. Just sleep, the wind whispered. Just let go. Then, through the roar of the storm, came a sound. It was rhythmic, heavy, a dull thudding that vibrated through the frozen ground against her cheek. Thud, 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 thud. It was not the erratic scrambling of a loose horse. It was the steady, measured cadence of a mounted rider moving with purpose. Violet forced her eyes open. Her lashes were frozen together. She pried them apart with a willpower she did not know she possessed. A shadow appeared at the lip of the ravine, looming large against the swirling snow. It was a horse, massive and dark, and on its back, a figure sat motionless, looking down into the abyss. Violet tried to call out, but her voice was a frozen croak. She tried to lift her good arm, her fingers scrabbling uselessly against the rocks. The rider dismounted. He did not scramble or slide. He moved with a deliberate, controlled grace, descending the slope as if gravity were a suggestion rather than a law. He was coming for her. Violet's heart fluttered one last beat of fear, or perhaps hope. She could not tell if this was the angel of death or the devil himself coming to collect his due. The figure knelt beside her. She could not see his face, only the dark outline of a wide-brimmed hat and the heavy drape of a buffalo coat. Then, darkness took her completely. The world was a swirling vortex of white noise and biting cold, a chaotic void where Violet floated, untethered from the earth. She was aware of pain, a dull, throbbing ache in her shoulder, but it felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. What she felt most was the sensation of being lifted. She was no longer lying in the snow. She was airborne. Violet forced her eyes open, but the wind immediately stung them shut. Yet, in that brief glimpse, she saw the texture of buffalo fur and the strong line of a jaw covered in dark stubble. She was being held against a chest that felt as solid as a canyon wall. She had found freedom, not in the empty expanse of the prairie, but here, suspended above the frozen ground, in the arms of the Comanche scout who guarded half the frontier. Caleb Ward did not stumble. The wind howled around them, tearing at his coat and whipping her skirts, but he moved with a terrifying stability. He held her easily, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back, creating a cradle of warmth in the heart of the blizzard. Violet instinctively turned her face into his coat, inhaling the scent of wood smoke, damp leather, and rain. It was the scent of the wild, but for the first time in her life, the wild did not feel like a threat. It felt like sanctuary. "Hold on," he said. His voice was a deep rumble against her ear, felt more than heard over the storm. She gripped his lapel with numb fingers. For a moment, she wondered if this was a fever dream, a final hallucination before death claimed her, but the heat radiating from him was undeniably real. He marched through the snowdrifts that had nearly swallowed her horse, navigating the treacherous darkness with an instinct she could not comprehend. He carried her for what felt like miles, though it might have been only minutes. The wind suddenly died down, cut off by stone walls. The biting cold eased slightly. Caleb kicked open a rough wooden door. He ducked his head, carrying her into a small, low-ceilinged structure. It smelled of dry earth and pine resin. He walked to a cot in the corner and lowered her onto it. The loss of his body heat was a physical shock. Violet shivered violently, her teeth chattering. "Stay," he commanded. He moved away in the darkness. Violet heard the strike of a match, the hiss of sulfur, and then a small flame flared to life. Caleb lit a kerosene lantern hanging from a beam. The golden light revealed a small dugout cabin built into the side of the ravine. It was sparse, a stone hearth, a table, 2 chairs, and the cot she lay upon. Caleb did not look at her. He went to the hearth, kneeling to arrange kindling. His hands were large and scarred, yet they moved with precision. Within moments, a fire was crackling, chasing the damp chill from the room. He stood and turned to her then. In the lantern light, he looked even more formidable. His eyes were dark, assessing her not as a woman, but as a situation to be managed. "Your shoulder," he said. "Is it broken?" Violet tried to sit up and gasped as pain shot through her left side. I do not think so. Dislocated, perhaps, or just badly bruised." He stepped closer. "Let me see." It was not a request. He reached out and unbuttoned the top of her torn dress, peeling the fabric back just enough to expose the skin of her shoulder. His fingers were calloused, but surprisingly gentle as he probed the joint. Violet held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was improper. A strange man, a Comanche, touching her skin in a remote cabin. By the standards of the town, she was ruined. "Bruised," he pronounced, pulling the fabric back up. "You are lucky. The rocks usually take a toll." He turned away, dismissing the intimacy of the moment as if it were nothing more than checking a horse's fetlock. He went to a small iron stove in the corner and poured water from a bucket into a coffee pot. "Drink this when it is hot," he said. "It will stop the shaking." Violet watched him. She waited for the questions. "Who are you? Why are you here? What did you steal?" She waited for the judgment she had seen in Gideon's eyes, the disdain she heard in Regina's voice. But Caleb said nothing. He simply made the coffee, his movements efficient and silent. The silence stretched, but it was not heavy. For the first time in 3 years, Violet realized she was not bracing herself for an insult. No one was telling her she was taking up too much space. No one was telling her to be quiet. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb poured the steaming liquid into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Do not thank me yet. You are alive, but you are miles from nowhere in a storm that kills cattle." He pulled a chair to the fire and sat, taking a knife and a piece of wood from his pocket, beginning to whittle. He seemed content to ignore her. "I am Violet Hale," she said, feeling the need to bridge the gap. "I know who you are," Caleb said without looking up. "You are the widow from the ranch that blocks the pass." "Is that how I am known?" Violet asked bitterly. "An obstacle." Caleb looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "To the railroad. Everyone is an obstacle, or fuel." The coffee was bitter and strong, but it spread warmth through her chest. Violet wrapped her hands around the cup. "I cannot go back there. They threw me out." "I know," Caleb said. "I saw the tracks. You were running blind." "They said I stole from them," Violet said, the injustice bubbling up again. "They said I killed my husband." Caleb stopped whittling. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Did you?" "No." Violet nearly spilled the coffee. "I loved Luke. He was weak, perhaps, but I loved him." Caleb held her gaze for a long moment, searching for the lie. He must have found the truth, for he nodded once and went back to the wood. "Then you have a problem, because down in town, the story is already written. The sheriff has a warrant." "How do you know?" "I hear things," Caleb said. "The wind carries voices if you know how to listen. And I saw Sheriff Rusk talking to a man in a gray suit 2 days ago. They were exchanging money in the alley behind the saloon." "Silas Tarrant," Violet said, the name tasting like ash. "The railroad agent. They are buying the law," Caleb said matter-of-factly. "They run wagons at night along the southern ridge, unmarked crates, contraband. If you go back to town, Mrs. Hale, you will not get a trial. You will get a cell, and then a quiet burial." Violet felt the cold return, settling deep in her stomach. "So I am to just disappear, let them take everything Luke left me, let them destroy his name." "Better his name destroyed than your life ended," Caleb said. "No," Violet said. The word came out harder than she intended. She set the cup down. "I have proof, or I can get it." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Proof?" "Luke wrote a letter," Violet said, speaking quickly. "Before he died, he hid it, and there is a map, a survey of the water rights. Gideon and Tarrant think they can sell the water, but Luke changed the deed. I just need to find where he put the final papers." "And then what?" Caleb asked. "You walk into the auction and wave a piece of paper at men who buy judges." "I stop the sale," Violet said. "I force them to acknowledge the law." Caleb laughed softly. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You have faith in white man's law. I do not." "I have faith in the truth," Violet countered. "The truth is what the man with the Winchester says it is," Caleb said. He stood up and walked to the door, checking the storm. "You are a town woman. You know how to balance a ledger and pour tea. You do not know how to fight men like Tarrant." "I can learn," Violet said. She stood up, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. "I am not useless. I can shoot. I can ride." Caleb turned and looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the trembling in her hands, but he also saw the set of her jaw. He saw the fear, but he saw that she was still standing. "You fell off a horse in a storm because you panicked," Caleb said bluntly. "You have no coat. You have no weapon. If I had not come, you would be a frozen statue by morning." "Then teach me," Violet said. "Help me. You hate the railroad too. You said they are eating the land." Caleb was silent. He looked at the fire, then back at her. He was a man who walked alone because it was safer. Involvement meant complications, but he remembered the way the railroad crews had shot buffalo just to watch them rot. He remembered the fences cutting across the trails his mother's people had used for generations. "If I help you," Caleb said slowly, "you do exactly as I say. No questions, no arguing. If I say hide, you hide. If I say run, you run." "I understand," Violet said. "And you pull your weight," he added. "I do not carry dead weight. You cook, you clean the weapons, and you learn to ride without falling off." "Deal," Violet said. "Get some sleep," Caleb said, pointing to the cot. "We start at dawn." The storm broke 2 days later. The world outside the dugout was blindingly white, the snow drifting high against the canyon walls. Violet's education began immediately. It was not gentle. Caleb was a demanding teacher. He taught her how to wrap her boots with burlap to keep the heat in. He taught her how to read the signs of the land, how a broken twig could tell a story of 3 hours ago, how the flight of a crow could signal a rider miles away. He gave her a revolver, a heavy Colt that felt like a cannon in her hand. "Do not aim with your eye," he told her as they stood in the snow, aiming at a pine cone. "Aim with your hand. Feel the line." Violet fired. The bullet kicked up snow 5 feet to the left. "Again," Caleb said. She fired until her hand ached and her ears rang, but by the afternoon, she hit the pine cone. Caleb gave a curt nod. It was the highest praise she would get. Life in the dugout was intimate in a way that made Violet's cheeks burn. Though Caleb seemed oblivious, they lived in a space no larger than a pantry. They breathed the same air, ate from the same pot. On the 3rd evening, Violet returned from gathering wood to find the door unlatched. She pushed it open, stomping the snow from her boots. "I found some dry cedar," she began, then stopped. Caleb was standing by the fire. He had stripped off his shirt to wash. Violet had seen men without shirts before ranch hands working in the summer heat. But this was different. The firelight danced over bronze skin that was a map of violence. There were scars on his back, long, pale lines that looked like whip marks, and a jagged, puckered star on his shoulder that could only be a bullet wound. He was muscular, not in the bulky way of a laborer, but with the lean, ropey definition of a predator. He froze as the cold air hit his skin. He turned slowly. Violet could not look away. She felt a strange tightening in her chest, a heat that had nothing to do with the fire. He was beautiful in a terrifying way. Caleb's eyes met hers. There was a flicker of something there, surprise, perhaps, or a sudden awareness of his own nakedness in front of a woman who was not a saloon girl. He reached for a towel and draped it over his shoulder, covering the worst of the scars. But he did not hurry. "Knock next time," he said. His voice was low, rougher than usual. I am sorry," Violet stammered, backing up. "I did not know." "It is a small room. Violet," he said. He used her name. It sounded strange and intimate on his tongue. "There is nowhere to hide here." He turned back to the basin. The tension in the room was thick, vibrating like a plucked bowstring. Violet set the wood down, her heart racing. She realized then that he was not just a guardian or a teacher. He was a man, and she was a woman who had been lonely for a very long time. She retreated to the corner to sort the beans for supper, her hands shaking slightly. The next morning, the sound of a whistle cut through the clear air. Caleb was instantly alert, reaching for his rifle. He moved to the door, cracking it open just an inch. "Who is it?" Violet asked, reaching for the Colt he had given her. "A boy," Caleb said, relaxing slightly. "On a mule. He is making enough noise to wake the dead." Violet looked over his shoulder. "That is Tommy Pike, the stable boy from the ranch." She pushed past Caleb and ran out into the snow. "Tommy!" The boy looked up, his face red from the cold. When he saw her, he nearly fell off his mule. "Mrs. Violet." "You are alive. Donna Rosa said you were, but I did not believe it." "I am alive," Violet said, grabbing the mule's bridle. "Is anyone following you?" "No, ma'am. I took the goat trail like Donna Rosa said." Tommy reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled envelope. "Dr. Callahan gave me this. She said it is urgent." Violet tore open the envelope. Her eyes scanned the hurried scrawl of the doctor's handwriting. "Violet, they are moving fast. Rusk has posted the foreclosure notice. The auction is set for 10 days from now, at the county courthouse. Gideon is telling everyone you drowned in the river. They are going to sell the ranch to a holding company called Red River Transit, a shell for Tarrant. If you have proof, bring it. If not, stay dead. It is safer. Yours." "May 10 days," Violet whispered. She looked at Caleb. "They are selling it in 10 days. "That is fast," Caleb said, stepping out of the cabin. "Too fast. They are afraid." "They should be," Violet said. A cold resolve settled over her. She looked at the date on the letter. "We have little time." Tommy looked at Caleb with wide, fearful eyes. Is that him?" "Yes," Violet said. "This is Mr. Ward. He saved my life." Caleb ignored the boy's stare. He looked at Violet. 10 days is enough time to ride to the railhead and back, if we ride hard. But we need to know where the papers are." "I think I know," Violet said. "Luke mentioned a safe place near the water, an old line shack on the North Ridge. But it is guarded." "Then we will have to be quiet," Caleb said. Tommy turned his mule around. "I have to get back before Gideon misses me. He beats me if I am late." "Tell Donna Rosa and Dr. Callahan to be ready," Violet said. Tell them I am coming back." She watched the boy ride away until he was a speck in the white landscape. Violet looked down at her hand. The gold wedding band glinted in the sunlight. It was a symbol of her marriage. Yes, but lately it had felt like a shackle, binding her to a family that hated her. Slowly, deliberately, she slid the ring off her finger. She held it up, looking at the circle of gold. She thought of Luke. She missed him, but she realized with a start that she did not miss the life of fear he had subjected her to. He had let his mother bully her. He had let Gideon belittle her. She was not going back to be that Violet. She put the ring back on. Caleb was watching her. "Why did you put it back?" "Because it is not a chain anymore," Violet said, her voice firm. "It is a claim. That land is mine, and I'm going to take it back, not for the Hales, for me." Caleb nodded. A hint of a smile touched the corner of his mouth, the first she had ever seen. "Then saddle up, Mrs. Hale," he said. "We have a train to catch." Violet turned to the cabin to gather her gear. She looked at the path the storm had taken, now calm and bright. The wind was still blowing, but she no longer bent against it. She leaned into it. She was ready. The days that followed were not measured in hours, but in blisters and bruises. The education of Violet Hale was a dismantling of everything she had been taught a lady should be. She learned that a fire required more than just wood. It required coaxing and breath and the right kind of dry moss. She learned that water was heavy, that a horse needed to be cooled down before it could drink, and that silence was a language all its own. Most of all, she learned the weight of iron. "Lower your center of gravity," Caleb said. He stood 10 paces behind her in a small clearing surrounded by scrub oak. Violet held the heavy Colt revolver with 2 hands. Her arms trembled from the weight of it. She aligned the sights on a dead stump 20 yards away. She squeezed the trigger. The gun roared, kicking back violently. The bullet tore through the leaves of a tree high above the stump. "You are anticipating the recoil," Caleb said, his voice flat. He did not scold, nor did he praise. He simply observed, "You are flinching before the hammer strikes. Let the surprise happen." "It is hard to be surprised by an explosion in your hand," Violet muttered, rubbing her soreness. "If you cannot control the weapon, you are dangerous only to yourself." Caleb said, "Try again." She fired until her hands were black with powder residue, and her ears rang with a high-pitched whine. She did not become a sharpshooter. She did not magically learn to shoot the wings off a fly, but by the 3rd day, she could hit the stump 3 times out of 6. It was enough to stop a man at close range, and that was all Caleb required. On the 4th day, Caleb took her to the high ridge known as the Devil's Backbone. It was a grueling climb, the horses picking their way up a trail that was little more than a deer track. When they reached the summit, the wind whipped Violet's hair across her face, stinging her cheeks. Below them, the prairie stretched out like a tawny ocean, vast and undulating. But there was a scar running through it. To the southeast, a dark line of overturned earth and wooden ties cut across the valley floor. Smoke from the work camps rose in thick, greasy pillars. "Look at it," Caleb said, pointing toward the scar. "The railroad," Violet said. "It is a knife," Caleb corrected. "They are not just taking your land. Violet, they are cutting the frontier in half. They put up fences that stop the migration of the herds. They divert rivers that feed the dry lands. When they are done, there will be no wild places left, just stations and timetables." Violet looked at the destruction. From the ranch house, the railroad had been an abstract threat, a matter of contracts and money. From here, it looked like a disease eating the earth. "Silas Tarrant is building a depot near the river bend," Caleb said, "a temporary warehouse for their supplies. And their records." Violet turned to him. "The ledger. If they are running illegal shipments at night to bypass taxes and move contraband, it will be written down." Caleb said, "Men like Tarrant are arrogant. They believe they own the law, so they document their crimes." "We have to get it," Violet said. "Tonight," Caleb answered. The temporary depot was a cluster of canvas tents and rough-hewn wooden shacks surrounding a siding where a steam engine sat idling, hissing like a sleeping dragon. The air smelled of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and creosote. They left the horses a mile back. Violet wore a dark wool coat Caleb had scavenged, her hair tucked up under a wide-brimmed hat. She moved low to the ground, mimicking Caleb's fluid crouch. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady. "Stay close," Caleb whispered. "The guards are patrolling the perimeter, but they are lazy. They expect trouble from the outside, not from shadows." They slipped past a sleeping guard who smelled of cheap whiskey. They moved toward the main structure, a wooden shack with a light burning in the window. Violet peered through a crack in the siding. Inside, a clerk was dozing at a desk. Behind him, on a shelf, sat a row of thick, leather-bound books. "The black one," Caleb breathed against her ear. "That is the shipping manifest." Caleb moved to the door. He did not kick it in. He slid a knife blade between the jamb and the latch, lifting the bar with a soft click. He was inside before the clerk could lift his head. Caleb's hand clamped over the man's mouth. He dragged him backward, pressing a pressure point on the man's neck. The clerk went limp, unconscious but alive. "Find it," Caleb ordered, watching the door. Violet rushed to the shelf. She grabbed the black ledger. She opened it, her eyes scanning the columns. October 12th, midnight run, unmarked crates, paid in specie. "This is it," she whispered. "And look." She pulled a folded paper from the back of the book. It was a foreclosure notice, stamped with the official seal of the county court. "The seal," Violet said. "It is crooked, and the ink is the wrong shade of blue." This was not stamped at the courthouse. Tarrant stamped it himself. "We have what we need," Caleb said. "Go!" A shout rang out from outside. "Hey, who's in there?" The sleeping guard had woken up. "Run!" Caleb shoved her toward the back window. Violet scrambled through the opening just as a gunshot shattered the glass above her head. She hit the dirt and scrambled up, clutching the ledger to her chest. "To the ridge!" Caleb shouted, firing a shot into the air to create confusion. They sprinted toward the rocky incline that led away from the camp. Men were shouting. Lanterns were swinging wildly in the dark. Bullets kicked up dust around their heels. They reached the narrow goat path leading up the canyon wall. It was steep, covered in loose shale. Violet scrambled up, her boots slipping on the shifting stones. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "Keep moving," Caleb urged from below her. She reached for a handhold, a protruding root. It snapped. Violet fell backward. The world tilted. She slid down the shale, heading for a 20-foot drop into the darkness. She flailed, dropping the ledger, her fingers clawing uselessly at the dirt. "Caleb!" A hand shot out of the darkness. Strong fingers clamped around her wrist. halting her slide with a jolt that nearly dislocated her shoulder again. She looked up. Caleb was braced against a boulder, holding her suspended over the edge. His teeth were gritted, the veins in his neck standing out. "I have you," he grunted. "I have you, Violet." He pulled. With a heave of raw strength, he dragged her up and over the lip of the ledge. She collapsed against him, shaking uncontrollably. "The book," she gasped. "I dropped the book." "No," Caleb said. He reached into his coat and pulled out the black ledger. "I caught it before I caught you." He was breathing hard, his dark eyes searching her face. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered. "Thank you." For a moment, there was no sound but the wind and the distant shouting of the railroad men. The barrier between them, the wall of reserve Caleb kept so carefully constructed, had cracked. He had not just saved an asset, he had saved her. "We need to move," he said, his voice rough. But he helped her stand, his hand lingering on her arm a second longer than necessary. The next day, the dynamic between them had shifted. They were no longer teacher and student. They were accomplices. They rode to a small settlement on the edge of the county, where Caleb knew a man. Liam O'Connell was a former rail worker who had been beaten half to death for asking too many questions about the night shipments. They found him living in a lean-to, nursing a broken leg. He was a scarecrow of a man, terrified and bitter. "I cannot testify," Liam said, shaking his head. "Tarrant will kill me." "Tarrant is going to kill you anyway," Caleb said, standing in the doorway of the lean-to, blocking the light. "He knows you saw the crates. A loose end is a dangerous thing." Violet stepped forward. She took the stolen ledger and opened it to a specific page. "We have the proof, Liam. We have the dates and the payments. We just need a voice to say it is true. If you speak, the judge cannot ignore it. If you stay silent, this railroad will roll over every home in the valley, including yours." Liam looked at the ledger, then at Violet. He saw the dust on her face, the determination in her eyes. She was not the delicate widow he had heard about. "If I speak," Liam said quietly, "I need protection, real protection." "You have it," Caleb said. "Until the trial is done. You are under my watch." Liam nodded slowly. "All right, I will tell them about the midnight trains." With the ledger and the witness secured, there was one final piece of the puzzle missing. The letter, the will. "I need to go into town," Violet said as they camped that night. "It is suicide," Caleb said. He was cleaning his rifle by the fire. "I need to see Dr. Callahan," Violet insisted. "She was the only one who stood by me. If anyone knows where my personal things went, it is her, and I need to know what Gideon is planning for the auction." Caleb looked at her for a long time. "If you go as a ghost. And if you are caught, I cannot storm the jail to get you out." "I understand," Violet said. She rode into town the next morning, hidden under a heavy canvas poncho and a slouch hat, looking like any other drifter passing through. The town felt hostile. The air was thick with tension. As she tied her horse near the alley behind the clinic, she saw a poster nailed to a post. It was a sketch of her face, wanted for questioning, but it was the whispers that hurt more than the poster. As she walked past the general store, keeping her head down, she heard two women talking. She ran off with a savage. One hissed, "Left her husband's grave fresh to go lay with a Comanche? Disgraceful." "I heard she helped them kill Luke," the other replied. "Bewitched him first, then slit his throat. Gideon Hale said she has always been wild." Violet gritted her teeth, her nails digging into her palms. They had turned her tragedy into a sordid tale to entertain themselves. To them, she was not a victim. She was a monster. She slipped into the back door of the clinic. Dr. May Callahan was washing instruments in a basin. She spun around as Violet entered, reaching for a scalpel. "It is me," Violet whispered, taking off her hat. The doctor dropped the scalpel. "Violet, merciful heaven, child, you are alive." "I need your help, May," Violet said. "I am going to stop the auction." Dr. Callahan looked at the door, then back at Violet. Her face was pale, Violet, do you know what they are saying? Gideon has the whole town convinced you are a devil. If I am seen helping you, I could lose my practice. Tarrant owns the building now. I know, Violet said. I am asking you to risk everything. But if you do not, Tarrant wins. He takes the ranch, the water, and he keeps buying the law. The older woman looked down at her hands. They were trembling. She had spent 30 years building this clinic, serving this town. To lose it would be to lose her life's work. She looked up, and her eyes were wet but hard. I would rather be poor than blind. Violet, I cannot watch them do this. She walked to a cabinet and unlocked it. From the bottom shelf, she pulled out a heavy, leather-bound book, the family Bible. Regina threw it in the trash pile when she tossed your clothes, Dr. Callahan said. I picked it up. I thought you might want it for comfort. Violet took the Bible. Her hands shook. Luke said he hid the letter where no one would look. Gideon shook this Bible upside down and found nothing. Because Gideon is a man who looks only at the surface, Violet murmured. She opened the Bible. She did not flip the pages. She took a knife from the doctor's tray and slit the leather lining of the back cover. There, sandwiched between the cardboard and the leather, was a folded document. Violet pulled it out. It was a handwritten will, dated 3 days before Luke's death. I, Luke Hale, being of sound mind, do hereby revoke all former wills. I leave the Hale Ranch, including all water rights and grazing lands, to my wife, Violet Hale. I specifically exclude my brother, Gideon Hale, from any claim, as I fear his dealings with the railroad have compromised the future of this family. He knew, Violet whispered, tears stinging her eyes. He tried to save us. That changes everything, Dr. Callahan said. But you cannot just walk into the auction. Sheriff Rusk will arrest you before you can open your mouth. I know, Violet said. That is why I have a plan. She rode back to the rendezvous point at sunset. Caleb was waiting. You got it, he said. It was not a question. I got it, Violet said, patting her saddlebag. And I saw the town. They hate me, Caleb. They truly hate me. People hate what they fear, Caleb said. He walked over to her horse and helped her down. They fear you because you broke the rules. You survived without them. Violet looked at him. The sun was setting behind him, casting him in a halo of fire. I survived because of you? No, Caleb said softly. I just pulled you out of the snow. You are the one who kept walking. The distance between them had vanished. Violet reached out and touched his arm. He did not pull away. The connection was electric, a sudden awareness of the heat between them that had been building for days. Why do you do it? She asked. Why do you guard the frontier for people who spit on you? Because it is my home too, Caleb said. My mother was Comanche. My father was a trapper. I do not belong in the town, and the tribes are being pushed onto reservations. The frontier, the line between, that is the only place I fit. I guard it because if I do not, the darkness will swallow everything. You are not alone in the dark anymore, Violet said. Caleb looked at her, his eyes searching hers. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. The air crackled with the possibility. But then, the sound of breaking twigs shattered the moment. Caleb spun around, rifle raised. It was not an attack. It was Tommy Pike, the stable boy, riding his mule hard. Mrs. Violet, Mr. Ward, Tommy screamed. What is it? Violet asked, her heart sinking. The sheriff, Tommy gasped, sliding off the mule. He just put up a new poster, a big one. He handed a crumpled paper to Caleb. Caleb read it, his face turning into a mask of stone. He handed it to Violet. Wanted for theft of documents and conspiracy. Violet Hale and the Comanche scout known as Caleb Ward, dead or alive. Reward $1,000. They raised the stakes. Caleb said quietly. They know we have the ledger. $1,000, Violet whispered. Every gun in the territory will be looking for us. The game has changed, Caleb said. He looked at Violet, and the softness was gone from his eyes, replaced by the hard glint of the warrior. It is no longer about the law. Violet, it is about survival. We go to the auction, Violet said, crushing the poster in her fist. In 2 days. We've finished this. If we go, Caleb said. We might not come out. Then we go down fighting, Violet said. Together. Caleb nodded. Together. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into darkness. But this time, Violet did not fear the night. She checked the load in her Colt, the weight of the iron familiar and comforting in her hand. The morning of the auction dawned with a sky the color of a fresh bruise, blue-black and heavy with the threat of more snow. The town of Red River Crossing was already awake, buzzing with a morbid energy. Auctions were a spectator sport, especially when it was the mighty Hale Ranch being carved up and sold for scraps. By 10 o'clock, the square in front of the courthouse was packed. Wagons lined the muddy streets, and men in thick coats huddled together, their breath steaming in the frigid air. They came to see the fall of a dynasty. On the wooden steps of the courthouse, Gideon Hale stood like a king surveying his subjects. He wore a new suit that strained at the buttons across his stomach, his thumbs hooked into his waistcoat. Beside him stood Silas Tarrant, the railroad agent, looking bored and checking his gold pocket watch. He radiated the quiet arrogance of a man who had already counted the money. Sheriff Rusk prowled the perimeter of the steps, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. His deputies were scattered through the crowd, their eyes scanning for trouble. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. "We are gathered here today to settle the foreclosure of the Hale property, comprising 3,000 acres of prime grazing land and water access. Get on with it," a voice shouted from the back. "Before the snow starts," Gideon smirked. He leaned over to Tarrant. "Just another hour, and the deed is done. The bitch is probably halfway to Mexico by now. Or dead in a ditch," Tarrant replied indifferently. "It matters little. The paperwork is filed." "We open the bidding at $500, the auctioneer shouted. $1,000, Tarrant said clearly. It was a lowball offer, a formality. He was bidding on behalf of the Red River Transit Company. "I have 1,000, the auctioneer called. "Do I hear 1,500? Silence stretched across the square. No one in town had the capital to fight the railroad, and those who did feared Tarrant's wrath. "Going once," the auctioneer chanted. "Going twice. I contest this sale." The voice rang out like a bell, clear and cutting through the cold air. The crowd parted down the center of the main street. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Violet Hale rode toward the courthouse. She sat tall on a borrowed horse, wearing her black mourning dress. But she had discarded the veil. Her face was pale, set in a mask of grim determination. She did not look like a fugitive. She looked like a judge. Riding just behind her, on his paint horse, was Caleb Ward. He did not have his rifle drawn, but his presence was a weapon in itself. He scanned the rooftops and the alleyways, his body coiled with a lethal tension. "It is the widow," someone shouted. "And the scout. She is alive." Gideon's face went the color of curdled milk. "Sheriff, arrest her. She is a wanted criminal." Sheriff Rusk stepped forward, drawing his revolver. "Violet Hale, get down from that horse. You are under arrest for theft and conspiracy." Violet pulled her horse to a halt 10 yards from the steps. She did not dismount. She looked down at the sheriff, her eyes blazing. "If you arrest me now—" "Sheriff," Violet declared, her voice loud enough for the back rows to hear, "then you confirm to every soul in this town that the law here is bought and paid for. You are a thief," Rusk spat, cocking the hammer of his gun. "I am a widow defending her home." Violet countered. "And I have the right to be heard before my land is sold out from under me?" "Let her speak," a woman shouted from the crowd. It was Dr. May Callahan. "Yeah, let her speak." Others joined in. The mood of the mob was shifting. They liked a show, and they liked an underdog. Rusk hesitated, glancing at Tarrant. The railroad agent's eyes were cold slits. He gave a barely perceptible nod. "Let her talk, then hang her." Violet dismounted. Caleb swung down from his saddle a second later. placing himself between her and the deputies. He kept his hands away from his holsters, but his stance dared them to try something. Violet walked up the first 2 steps, turning to face the town. She held up the heavy leather satchel she carried. "They told you I ran away," she said. "They told you I stole from my husband. They lied." "She is hysterical," Gideon shouted, stepping forward. "She is grieving and out of her mind. Take her away." "I have the ledger," Violet shouted, "drowning him out." She pulled the black book from the bag and held it high. "The ledger from the railroad depot. It details every illegal shipment, every ounce of contraband whiskey and stolen goods. Silas Tarrant has moved through this valley in the dark of night." Tarrant stiffened. The boredom vanished from his face. "That is stolen property," Tarrant said, his voice smooth but dangerous. "Sheriff, seize that book." "And I have a witness," Violet continued. Pointing to the edge of the crowd, Liam O'Connell, the injured rail worker, hobbled forward on crutches. Supported by Dr. Callahan, he looked terrified, but he kept moving. "That man," Tarrant hissed to his head of security, a thug named Miller standing in the shadows. "Shut him up." Miller moved. He didn't draw a gun. He pulled a knife and lunged toward Liam from the side, intending to slip the blade between the man's ribs in the press of the crowd. Caleb Ward moved faster. He did not shout. He drew his Colt with a speed that blurred the eye. Bang! The shot was deafening. Miller screamed and dropped the knife, clutching his hand. Caleb had shot the weapon right out of his grip. The crowd screamed and scrambled back, creating a wide circle around the violence. Sheriff Rusk swung his gun toward Caleb. "Drop it, Ward!" Rusk roared. Caleb did not drop it. He held his aim steady on the sheriff's chest. "Anyone else touches the witness, the next shot goes in a knee." "Hold your fire!" Violet screamed. She stepped in front of Caleb, shielding him with her body. "Look at them. They are trying to kill the witness in broad daylight. Is this the justice of Red River Crossing?" The townspeople were staring at Miller, who was bleeding on the snow, the knife lying next to him. The reality of the violence shattered Tarrant's facade of civilized business. "Speak, Liam," Violet commanded. Liam O'Connell straightened up on his crutches. "It is true," he yelled, his voice shaking. "I night trains, Tuesdays and Thursdays. No manifest, Mr. Tarrant pays double wages for us to load crates of rifles and whiskey bound for the territories. Illegal trade?" A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. Smuggling weapons to the territories was a federal crime, and it endangered everyone on the frontier. Lies from a disgruntled employee. Tarrant scoffed, though sweat had begun to bead on his forehead despite the cold. "This proves nothing about the ranch." "No," Violet said. "But this does." She pulled the folded document from the Bible, which Dr. Callahan had handed to her. "This is the last will and testament of Luke Hale," Violet announced, dated 3 days before he died. "In it, he leaves the ranch solely to me, and he explicitly excludes Gideon Hale." Gideon laughed, a desperate, high-pitched sound. "A forgery. She wrote it herself. I verified it." Dr. May Callahan stepped up to the stairs. "I have known Luke's handwriting since he was learning his letters. That is his hand. And the ink matches the entries in his personal diary from that week." "And this," Violet said, pulling out the foreclosure notice Rusk had given her. "Look at the seal. It is a fake. Tarrant stamped it himself to force a quick sale." She walked up the steps and slammed the papers onto the auctioneer's podium. "Compare them. Compare the seal on the notice to the seal on the auction license." The auctioneer, a nervous man who wanted no part of a gunfight, looked at the papers. He squinted. He looked at Tarrant, then at the sheriff, and finally at the angry crowd. The seals do not match," the auctioneer stammered. "The foreclosure notice does not bear the county watermark." "It is a conspiracy," Gideon shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Violet. "She is a witch. She poisoned Luke's mind. You killed him." Violet turned on Gideon, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "You and Tarrant, you knew he changed the will. You knew he was going to back out of the water deal." "I did not know he changed it," Gideon yelled. "He told me he was going to, but I thought we—" He stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. "You thought you what?" "Gideon," Violet asked softly. "You thought you stopped him in time." Gideon looked around. The eyes of the town were upon him. He saw disgust. He saw realization. He did not know about the will in the Bible. A voice croaked from the gathered witnesses. Donna Rosa, the old housekeeper, stepped out from behind a wagon. She held a shawl tight around her shoulders. "But he knew there were papers," Donna Rosa said. "Because the night of the funeral, I saw Regina Hale burning papers in the fireplace. She said, 'This is the draft. We must be sure there are no others.'" Gideon was there. He laughed. He said, "Luke is dead, and the dead do not write new laws." Gideon's knees seemed to give way. He slumped against the railing. "Regina burned the copy," Violet realized aloud. "But Luke hid the original." Silas Tarrant decided the ship was sinking. He adjusted his coat, his face devoid of emotion. "This is a domestic squabble. It has nothing to do with the railroad. I withdraw my bid." He turned to leave, signaling his men to clear a path. "Not so fast." Caleb's voice stopped him. Caleb holstered his gun, but he did not step down. He looked at the sheriff. "Sheriff Rusk," Caleb said, "you are a man who likes money, but I wonder if you like a federal noose." Rusk glared at him. "Watch your mouth, scout." "Tarrant is not just smuggling whiskey," Caleb said. He looked directly at Tarrant. "That ledger shows shipments of Army-issue rifles, stolen from the supply depots in the north. If the U.S. Marshals see that book, they will not just arrest the smuggler. They will hang every man who held a badge and looked the other way." Rusk went pale. The corruption of a small town was one thing. Federal treason was another. "If you arrest him now," Caleb said calmly, "you might convince a judge you were investigating him all along. You might save your own neck." It was a lifeline, a slim, dirty lifeline, but the only one Rusk had. Rusk looked at Tarrant. He looked at the angry townspeople who now saw Tarrant not as a benefactor, but as a criminal bringing heat to their doorstep. Slowly, Rusk holstered his gun. He pulled a pair of iron handcuffs from his belt. "Silas Tarrant," Rusk said, his voice flat, "I am holding you for questioning regarding the theft of federal property." "You idiot," Tarrant snarled. "I own you." "Not anymore," Rusk said. He grabbed Tarrant's arm. Tarrant shoved him back and reached inside his coat. Click. Rusk was faster this time. He jammed the barrel of his revolver under Tarrant's chin. "Give me a reason, Silas, please. I have had a very long week." Tarrant froze. Slowly, he raised his hands. Gideon saw his ally fall. He tried to scramble down the side steps, attempting to vanish into the alley. "Going somewhere, Gideon!" Violet stood at the bottom of the steps, blocking his path. She looked small against his bulk, but she did not flinch. "Get out of my way!" Gideon panted. "I am still a Hale." "No," Violet said. "You are just a man who let his brother die for a pocketful of coins." Two deputies stepped forward, grabbing Gideon by the arms. He struggled, shouting obscenities, blaming Regina, blaming the weather, blaming Violet. They dragged him toward the jail wagon. The auctioneer banged his gavel on the podium, a lonely sound in the stunned square. "The foreclosure is canceled. Property title remains with the estate of Luke Hale, Mrs. Violet Hale, sole proprietor." A cheer went up from the crowd. It started small, with Dr. Callahan and Liam, but it grew. The townspeople, realizing the danger had passed, relieved that their own lands were safe from Tarrant's predatory grasp, began to clap. Violet did not smile. She felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her, so heavy she almost fell. She felt a hand on her elbow. Steadying her, she looked up. Caleb was there. He was not looking at the crowd. He was looking at her. "Stand tall," he whispered. "Do not let them see you shake." Violet took a deep breath. She straightened her spine. She looked at the sheriff, at the handcuffed men, at the gaping crowd. She did not cry. The tears were for the girl she used to be, The girl who sat in the corner and balanced the books. That girl was gone, frozen in a ravine somewhere in the canyon. The woman who stood on the steps of the courthouse was forged in iron and ice. "It is over," she said to Caleb. Caleb looked at the horizon, where the storm clouds were finally beginning to break. "The fight is over, Violet, but the winter is still here." "Let it come," Violet said. "I am not afraid of the cold anymore." She walked down the steps, the crowd parting for her with newfound respect. She walked to her horse, mounted it, and sat waiting. Caleb mounted his paint horse. He took his place beside her, not ahead of her, beside her, together. They rode through the town of Red River Crossing, leaving the chaos of the law behind, turning their faces toward the open prairie and the long road home. The dust from the courthouse steps had settled, but the air in Red River Crossing remained thick with something that tasted like ash. Victory. Violet Hale discovered, did not feel like a trumpet blast. It felt like the sudden, ringing silence after a roof collapses. She stood by her horse, watching the deputies lead Gideon Hale away. He was not shouting anymore. He walked with his head down, his expensive suit mud-stained at the knees. A man who had gambled his soul on a sure thing and lost. The townspeople did not cheer as the wagon rolled away. They murmured. They looked at Violet with eyes that held a mixture of respect and deep, abiding suspicion. She had won. Yes, she had exposed the corruption that had been rotting their town from the inside, but she had done it by breaking every rule of their polite society. She was a woman who had ridden with a Comanche, a widow who had held a gun to the status quo. She was safe, but she was not one of them. "They will not forgive you for being right," Dr. Callahan said, stepping up beside her. The doctor lit one of her thin cigars, her hand trembling slightly now that the adrenaline had faded. "I do not need their forgiveness," Violet said quietly. She watched Caleb Ward standing near the livery stable. He was alone, a dark statue amidst the swirling activity of the town. The white men gave him a wide berth, their eyes sliding off him as if he were a shadow they hoped would disappear with the sun. "What will you do?" Dr. Callahan asked. "I am going home," Violet said. "To finish it." She mounted her horse. It was a slow ride back to the Hale Ranch. The wind had died down, leaving the prairie still and cold under a gray sky. Caleb rode 10 paces behind her, resuming his role as guardian, though the threat was gone. When they arrived at the main house, the front door was open. The wind was banging it against the frame. Violet walked into the parlor. The fire had burned down to cold ash. Regina Hale sat in the high-backed rocking chair, staring at the empty hearth. She looked smaller than Violet remembered, shrunken inside her black bombazine dress. Regina did not look up when Violet entered. "They took him," she said, her voice a dry rattle. "My son, he broke the law. Regina," Violet said. She felt no triumph. She waited for the surge of satisfaction. The vindication of seeing this cruel woman brought low, but it did not come. There was only a profound weariness. "He did what he had to do," Regina snapped, a flicker of the old fire returning. She turned her head, her eyes black and hateful. "To save this place, from you, from the bank, from the inevitable." "He destroyed this place," Violet corrected her. "And he destroyed Luke," Regina flinched. "Luke was weak." "Luke was kind," Violet said steadily. "And that is why you despised him, because you could not break him. So you tried to erase him." Violet walked to the heavy oak desk. It was still cluttered with the debris of Gideon's schemes, half-written letters, maps, the false promises of wealth. Sitting in the center of it all was the iron railroad spike. Violet picked it up. It was heavy, cold, and ugly. "You have no right to be here," Regina hissed. "This is my house." "No," Violet said. "According to the will, this house is mine, the land is mine, the cattle are mine." Regina gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. "You would turn an old woman out into the winter? You are heartless." Violet looked at the woman who had thrown her out into a blizzard without a coat. She looked at the woman who had burned her husband's papers and declared her a stranger. "I am not you, Regina," Violet said. "I will not throw you out. You can stay in this house. You can keep your room, and your fire, and your memories." Regina looked stunned, her mouth opening slightly. "But I will not live here with you," Violet continued. "I am taking the section of land by the creek, the crossing where the wagons stop. That is what Luke wanted. He wanted a place that connected people, not a fortress that kept them out." She turned to leave. "You are leaving the big house?" Regina asked, confusion warping her voice. "For that shack." "I am leaving a mausoleum," Violet said. "For a home." She walked out onto the porch. The air felt cleaner outside. The next week was a blur of labor. Violet did not move back into the main ranch house. Instead, she took Donna Rosa and Tommy Pike and moved to the old line shack near the creek crossing. It was a humble structure, little more than 4 walls and a roof. But it was theirs. Dr. Callahan helped when she could, bringing supplies and news from town. Liam O'Connell, the man whose testimony had saved them, came too. He was still limping, but he was eager to work. He felt safe here, under the watchful eye of the scout who patrolled the ridge. They worked from sunrise to sunset. They patched the roof, cleared the brush, and built a sturdy corral for the horses. They turned the shack into a way station, a place where travelers could water their teams and get a hot meal without being gouged by the prices in town. Violet worked harder than she ever had in her life. Her hands, once stained only with ink, were now rough with calluses. Her face was brown from the sun and wind. She wore plain cotton dresses and men's boots, and she did not care who saw. But while the days were filled with the noise of hammers and saws, the nights were quiet. Caleb did not sleep in the shack. He made a camp on the rise overlooking the creek, sleeping under the stars even as the temperatures dropped. He came down for meals. He hauled the heaviest logs, and he broke the wildest horses. But he kept a distance. He was a man caught between 2 worlds, and comfortable in neither. One afternoon, Violet was scrubbing the new counter in the main room when Dr. Callahan stopped by. "The town is settling down," the doctor said, accepting a cup of coffee. "Sheriff Rusk is actually doing his job for once, terrified that the federal marshals will come back. And a new agent from the railroad came by, a polite man from Chicago. He says they want to negotiate a fair right-of-way contract." "They can negotiate," Violet said, "but the price has gone up." The doctor smiled. "You have changed, Violet." "I have just stopped apologizing," Violet said. "And what about him?" The doctor nodded toward the window, where Caleb was visible by the corral, checking the hoof of a roan gelding. Violet looked out. "What about him?" "He stays," the doctor said. "He could have ridden off the day the trial ended. He has been offered jobs guiding hunting parties for rich Easterners. But he stays here, fixing fences. He is waiting," Violet said. "For what?" "For me to tell him to go," Violet said softly, "or to ask him to stay." "And which will it be?" Violet put down her rag. She looked at the man who had pulled her from the snow. She looked at the scar on his back that she had seen by the firelight. "I do not know if I can ask him," Violet said. "He values his freedom above all else." "Maybe," the doctor said, finishing her coffee. "Or maybe he just needs a reason to trade one kind of freedom for another." That evening, the sunset was a spectacular, violent streak of orange and purple across the western horizon. Violet finished her chores and walked up the rise to Caleb's camp. He was sitting by a small fire, cleaning his Winchester. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "The roof is finished," Violet said. "It will hold against the snow." Caleb said, "Liam is a good carpenter. We could not have done it without you," she said. Caleb shrugged. "I owed you a debt. You stood in front of a gun for me. The debt is paid." "Caleb," Violet said, 100 times over." She sat down on a flat rock across from him. The fire popped, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. "The townspeople want you to leave," Violet said bluntly. "I heard the whispers when I went in for supplies. They are uncomfortable." "They say it is not right, a white widow and a Comanche scout living on the same land. They have short memories," Caleb said, "and small hearts. My people, he continued, looking toward the north. They also wonder. They hear I am building a house for a white woman. They say I have forgotten who I am. They say I am a dog waiting for scraps at the table of the enemy. Is that what you are? Violet asked. Caleb looked at her, his eyes fierce. You know what I am. I do, Violet said. You are the man who guards the line. You are the man who walks where others are afraid to step. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out the iron railroad spike. Caleb watched her. You kept it. It was on Luke's desk, Violet said. For him, it was a promise of gold. For Gideon, it was a weapon. For the railroad, it is a tool of conquest. She knelt on the ground. The earth was hard, half frozen. She took a stone and hammered the spike into the ground, driving it deep until only the flat head was visible, flush with the soil. What are you doing? Caleb asked. I am burying it, Violet said. She dusted her hands off. It is not a symbol of the future anymore. It is just a piece of metal in the dirt. It does not control us. It does not define this land. She looked up at him. I am not going to be the widow Hale who mourns in the big house, and I am not going to be the victim who ran away. I am building something new here, a place where the road meets the river, a place for travelers. It is a good dream, Caleb said softly. It is not a dream, Violet said. It is a plan, but I cannot do it alone. I mean, I could hire men, I could run the books, but I do not want to do it alone. She stood up and walked around the fire until she was standing in front of him. I do not need a guardian anymore. Caleb, I know how to shoot. I know how to ride. I know how to survive. Caleb stood up. He towered over her, but he did not step back. Then what do you need? I need a partner, Violet said. Her voice was steady, clear as a bell. I need someone who knows the wind, someone who knows that the land is not something to be owned, but something to be lived with. She reached out and took his hand. His skin was rough, warm. He did not pull away. I'm asking you to stay, Violet said. Not as a scout, not as a hired gun, as yourself. Caleb looked at their joined hands. He looked at the woman who had transformed from a frightened bird into a hawk in the span of 2 weeks. People will talk, Caleb said. They will never let you forget. Let them talk, Violet said. They are behind us. I am looking forward. Caleb's hand tightened around hers. He stepped closer, breaking the invisible barrier he had maintained since the cave. I have spent my life walking the line, he said, his voice low and rough. Watching the fire from the dark. I never thought I would find a hearth that would welcome me. Welcome home, Caleb? Violet whispered. He did not kiss her then. It was too soon, and their bond was made of sterner stuff than simple romance. He raised her hand and pressed it briefly to his chest, over his heart. It was a vow more powerful than any spoken at an altar. The next morning, the air was crisp and clear. Ride with me, Caleb said. They saddled the horses. Violet rode her mare, Caleb his paint. They did not ride toward the town, nor toward the ranch house. They rode west. They rode past the creek, past the new fences, out into the open country where the grass grew tall and yellow. They rode until the settlement was just a speck behind them. They stopped at the top of a rise that marked the edge of the survey maps. Beyond this point, there were no fences. There was only the vast, rolling expanse of the high plains, stretching out to the purple line of the horizon. This was the frontier, the edge of the known world. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long, golden shadows across the grass. The wind blew steady and strong, smelling of sage and distance. Caleb sat easy in his saddle, looking out at the emptiness. This had been his church, his prison, and his duty for 10 years. This is where the map ends, Caleb said. Out there are no deeds, no judges, no railroads, not yet. It is beautiful, Violet said, and terrifying. It is free, Caleb said. He turned his horse to face her. The golden light illuminated his face, softening the sharp angles. You asked me to stay, and I will. I will help you build your station. I will watch your back. Our station, Violet corrected. Caleb smiled. It was a real smile this time, one that reached his eyes. "Our station. But you must understand," he continued. "I cannot live inside a fence forever, and neither should you. You have tasted the wind. Violet, you can never go back to being a bird in a cage." "I know," Violet said. She looked at the horizon. She felt the vastness of it calling to her, a song she was just learning to hear. "I do not want the cage. I want the sky." "Then we will live on the edge," Caleb said, "between the road and the wild. We will be the bridge." He extended his hand to her. Violet reached across the gap between their horses and took it. "Do you dare?" Caleb asked. "Do you dare to live a life that no one has written down for you, a life without a script?" Violet looked back at the smoke rising from the chimney of her small shack, a thin gray line against the blue. Then she looked at the man beside her, the warrior who had found peace, the outcast who had found a home. She squeezed his hand. "I dare," she said. The sun touched the horizon, setting the world on fire with light. They sat there for a long time, two silhouettes against the burning sky, watching the day end and the future begin. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. They turned their horses together and began the ride back, not as guardian and ward, but as equals, riding side by side into the deepening twilight. The winter snows did not leave the Texas panhandle quietly. They retreated in slow, sullen patches, turning the red earth to mud before finally surrendering to the vibrant, aggressive green of a new spring. It was April in the year 1881, and the world felt washed clean. At the bend of the river, where the old cattle trail intersected with the new wagon road, a sign swung gently in the breeze. It was made of fresh pine. The letters burned into the wood with a steady hand Hale's crossing. Water and feed, fair rates. Violet Hale stood on the porch of the expanded cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. The structure had grown over the winter. What had been a simple line shack was now a sturdy L-shaped building with a main room for dining, a small supply store, and a lean-to for travelers to sleep out of the rain. A wagon train, small but dusty, had just pulled in. It was a family from Missouri, looking to stake a claim further west. The father, a man with a tired face and boots worn through at the toes, walked up the steps, clutching his hat. "We do not have much silver, ma'am," the man said, his eyes darting nervously toward the corrals where his oxen were already drinking. "The station 10 miles back charged us $2 just for water. We heard the railroad rates are choking the trail." Violet looked at the man, then at the woman sitting in the wagon, holding a sleeping baby. She remembered the feeling of being cold, of having nothing but the clothes on her back and the kindness of strangers. "The water is free," Violet said. "The feed for the oxen is 50 cents, and if you want a hot meal stew and cornbread, it is 25 cents a plate. Children eat for nothing." The man stared at her, his mouth slightly open. "Free water in this county." "The river belongs to God, sir," Violet said, a small smile touching her lips. "I just keep the path to it clear. We do not do business like the railroad here." The relief that washed over the man's face was worth more than any coin. As he hurried back to tell his wife, Violet felt a warm hand on her shoulder. Donna Rosa stood there, carrying a basket of fresh eggs. The old woman looked younger than she had in years. The constant shadow of Regina Hale was gone, replaced by the honest fatigue of work she chose to do. "You are going to bankrupt us being so soft," Donna Rosa scolded, though her eyes were twinkling. "We made a profit last month, Rosa," Violet reminded her. "Enough to pay Liam his wages and buy the new seed. We have enough." "Enough," Donna Rosa repeated, testing the word. "It is a strange word for a Hale to use. They always wanted more." "I am not a Hale," Violet said softly. "Not anymore." She looked toward the ridge. It was late afternoon, the time when the shadows stretched long across the prairie. She was waiting. For months, the rhythm of their life had established itself. Violet ran the station, managing the supplies, the cooking, and the accounts. She was the heart of the place, but the limbs, The muscle that kept it safe was out there. Caleb Ward still rode the line. He still worked as a scout, guiding the confused and the lost, tracking down stray cattle, and ensuring that the rougher elements of the frontier gave Hale's Crossing a wide berth. But there was a difference now. Before, he rode to escape. Now, he rode to return. Violet saw him crest the hill. He was not alone. He was escorting 2 riders, likely a sheriff from another county or a marshal passing through. Even at this distance, Violet knew his silhouette, the easy grace in the saddle, the way he held his head. He separated from the other riders at the gate, pointing them toward the stables where Liam O'Connell was working. Then, Caleb turned his paint horse toward the house. He did not ride to the barn. He rode to the porch. He dismounted, the dust of the trail coating his coat. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright. "Problems?" Violet asked, leaning against the railing. "Comanche raiding party rumored to the north," Caleb said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "But it was just a hunting group chasing buffalo. I palavered with them. They will not trouble us." "And the lawmen?" "Just passing through to Amarillo," Caleb said. They asked if this was the place run by the white squaw. Violet stiffened slightly, but the sting was not as sharp as it used to be. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them it was the place run by the woman who owns the water," Caleb said, a smirk playing on his lips, "and that they should mind their manners if they wanted coffee." He stepped up onto the porch. He did not hesitate. He walked right up to her, invading her space in the way that had once terrified her and now felt like the only air she wanted to breathe. He took off his hat, and the wind caught his dark hair. "I am home," he said. "Welcome back," Violet replied. The town of Red River Crossing was changing too, though the change was as slow as the erosion of a canyon wall. The arrest of Silas Tarrant and the disgrace of Gideon Hale had broken the fever that had gripped the community, but the healing was a long process. Violet rode into town once a week for supplies she could not grow or trade for. In the beginning, the silence that followed her was hostile. Now, it was merely awkward. She tied her horse in front of the mercantile. Mr. Henderson, the owner, was sweeping the boardwalk. He was a man who had once refused to look her in the eye when Gideon was spreading lies. He stopped sweeping as she approached. He looked at her boots, then up to her face. "Mrs. Hale," he said. He cleared his throat. "Or is it still Mrs. Hale?" "It is Violet," she said simply. "Violet?" He nodded. We have some fresh calico in from the east, and the coffee beans are better this shipment." It was not an apology, not in words, but it was an offering. He was acknowledging her right to be there, her right to trade. "I will take 10 pounds of the coffee," Violet said, "and a sack of sugar." As she waited for her order, she saw the new sheriff walking down the street. It was not Rusk. He had been quietly removed from office by the county judge after the scandal. The new man was young, eager, and respectful. He tipped his hat to her. Walking out of the store, she ran into a woman she recognized, Mrs. Gable, the banker's wife. Mrs. Gable had been the one who whispered loudest about Violet. "Running off with a savage, Mrs. Gable stopped. She looked at Violet's plain dress, her sun-browned face, and the pistol she now wore openly at her hip. Then she looked at the heavy sacks of supplies Violet was carrying with ease. "Good morning, Violet," Mrs. Gable said stiffly. "Good morning, Martha," Violet replied. "I heard—" Mrs. Gable hesitated. "I heard you took in the Miller family when their wagon wheel broke last week. They said you did not charge them for the repair. They had children," Violet said. "And winter is hard on everyone." Mrs. Gable looked down at her gloved hands. "That was Christian of you, considering—" "Considering what?" Violet asked, her voice mild. "Considering how this town treated you," Mrs. Gable admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We were afraid. Violet, Gideon said you were dangerous." "Fear makes people believe strange things," Violet said. "I do not hold it against you, Martha, but I do not live by your rules anymore." She walked past the woman, loading her supplies onto her pack horse. She did not need their validation. She had built something real out of the wreckage of her life, and that reality was stronger than their gossip. That evening, after the travelers had been fed and the station was quiet, Violet sat in her room. It was a small room, but it was hers. On the dresser sat a small wooden box, carved from cedar. Violet opened it. Inside lay a gold ring. It was the wedding band Luke had given her. It was a beautiful thing, smooth and heavy with history. For months, she had worn it as a shield, a claim to the land. But the land was secure now. The deed was in her name, and the station was thriving. She picked up the ring. She thought of Luke. She remembered his smile, his gentleness, and his weakness. She remembered him with love, but it was a distant love, like a memory of a favorite song heard long ago. She was not the girl who had married Luke Hale. That girl had been looking for safety, for a place to belong. She had thought a husband would give her a home. She placed the ring back in the box and closed the lid with a soft click. It was not an act of rejection. It was an act of release. She was not forgetting him, but she was no longer married to a ghost. She was alive, and her blood ran hot and fast. She reached for the small leather cord lying next to the box. It was simple, just a strip of cured hide with a single, polished turquoise stone suspended from it. Caleb had given it to her 3 days ago, finding the stone in the riverbed. It matches the sky, he had said, limitless. She tied the cord around her neck. The stone rested against her throat, cool and solid. It was not a shackle. It was a gift. Violet blew out the lamp and walked out the back door. The night was vast and starry. The Milky Way, a river of diamond dust, spilled across the black velvet of the sky. A small campfire burned near the creek, where Caleb was sitting. He did not turn as she approached. He knew her step. "The wind is from the south," he said. "It will be warm tomorrow." Violet sat down beside him. She did not sit on the opposite side of the fire. She sat close enough that their shoulders brushed. "The Miller family left a thank you note," Violet said. "And the town is learning to see us." "They see you," Caleb said, tossing a twig into the flames. "They see a woman who beat the railroad. That is a rare thing." "They see us," Violet insisted. "They see that the station works because you keep the road safe." Caleb looked at her. The firelight danced in his dark eyes. "I am not used to being seen. Violet, I spent 10 years trying to be invisible." "You are not invisible to me," she whispered. She reached out and took his hand, his fingers interlaced with hers, a natural, easy fit. "I put the ring away," she said. Caleb went still. He looked at her throat, seeing the turquoise stone. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Violet said. "I honored him. I saved his land. But I am done mourning. I am done looking back." She turned her body toward him. "I spent so long being afraid. Caleb, afraid of Regina, afraid of the future, afraid of being alone. When you found me in the snow, I thought I was dead." "You were cold," Caleb said softly. "But you were fighting." "I was waiting to be saved," Violet corrected. "But you taught me that I had to save myself." She looked out at the dark outline of the station she had built, the corrals, the home that smelled of bread and cedar. "I was banished from a house that was never really mine," she said. "I was thrown out like trash. But look at what we made." "You made it," Caleb said. "We," she said firmly. "I told you. I do not want to do this alone." Caleb shifted, turning fully toward her. He lifted a hand and brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His touch was reverent, tender in a way that belied the violence his hands were capable of. "I have no land to give you. Violet," he said, "I have no gold. I have a horse, a rifle, and a bad reputation." "I have the land," Violet said, smiling. "And I have enough reputation for both of us. I do not want gold. Caleb, I want the man who stayed when everyone else ran." "I am not going anywhere," Caleb vowed. He leaned in, and this time there was no hesitation. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss of survival. It was slow, deep, and deliberate. It tasted of smoke and the wild sage wind, but it also tasted of peace. Violet wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. She felt the solid warmth of his chest, the beat of his heart against hers. She was in the arms of the Comanche who guarded the frontier, but she was not a damsel in distress. She was his equal. She was his anchor, just as he was her shield. When they broke apart, the silence of the prairie felt different. It was not empty. It was full of promise. "I never thought I would have this," Caleb admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "A fire, a woman who knows my name." "You have more than that," Violet said. "You have a future." They sat together as the fire burned down to glowing embers. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods by the river, a ceaseless, ancient song. Violet looked up at the stars. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the parlor of the Hale Ranch, the terror of the storm, the freezing cold of the ravine, and the heat of the courtroom. It had been a road of pain, but it had led her to this moment. She touched the turquoise stone at her throat. "Freedom," she said softly, testing the word again. "What is it?" Caleb asked. "I used to think freedom was having money," Violet said, "or having a deed to a house, but it is not." "What is it then?" "It is the right to choose," Violet said, looking at him. "The right to choose your own life, to choose who you stand beside, and to choose when to walk away and when to fight." Caleb nodded. "And the right to sleep without fear?" "Yes," Violet said. "That too." She stood up, pulling him with her. "Come inside. Caleb, the wind is getting cold." "I will check the horses first," he said, the habit of the guardian dying hard. "Do not be long," she said. "I won't." Violet walked back to the cabin. She stopped at the door and looked back. Caleb was standing by the corral, looking out at the vast, dark horizon. He was checking the line, watching for wolves, watching for danger. But then he turned. He looked at the cabin. He saw the light spilling from the window, casting a warm square of gold onto the dirt. He smiled, a private, quiet smile. And then he walked toward the light. Violet went inside. She left the door unlocked. The legend of the Hale Crossing grew over the years. Travelers on the road to Santa Fe would tell stories of the station by the Red River. They spoke of the fair prices and the clean water. They spoke of the woman with the steady eyes who ran the place, a woman who could discuss philosophy with a judge and shoot a rattlesnake at 20 paces. And they spoke of the man who was always there, a dark shadow on the ridge, a silent presence by the fire. They said he was a Comanche scout who had once guarded half the frontier. They said he was dangerous. But those who looked closely saw something else. They saw the way he looked at the woman. They saw the way she looked at him. They saw two people who had been forged in the same fire, who had stood back to back against a storm and won. They saw that the scout was not guarding the frontier anymore. He was guarding his home. And Violet Hale, the woman who had been banished by her in-laws, who had lost everything and found herself in the process, stood on her porch one evening years later. The station was busy, voices and laughter filling the air. Her own children were playing by the creek, their dark hair flashing in the sun. She looked at the horizon, where the railroad tracks now cut across the distance, trains whistling their mournful song. The world was changing. The Wild West was being tamed, fenced, and sold. But here, at the crossing, the wind still blew free. Violet touched the turquoise stone that she never took off. She took a deep breath of the sage-scented air. She was exactly where she chose to be. She was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Banished by her in-laws, she found freedom in the arms of a Comanche who guarded half the frontier. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment below telling me which country or city you are listening in. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed Violet and Caleb's journey, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Don't forget to hit the like button and give the video a hype to help this story reach more listeners. Your support keeps the spirit of the frontier alive. Thank you.